Suite aux discussions.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of the 7 women in Quebec who have recently lost their lives, and for all victims and survivors of gender-based violence across the country.
I now invite honourable members to rise. Oral questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has failed to get a vaccine delivery guarantee from the European Union. Reports indicate that vaccine deliveries from India could be delayed for all of April. Canada lags the developed world on vaccine deployment. How many more months of lockdowns will these new delays cause?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Canada has already received 500,000 vaccine doses from India on top of what was originally scheduled, and Canadians can also expect 1.5 million doses from the United States on top of what was originally scheduled. We are using every diplomatic channel and relationship possible to increase and advance our deliveries. Here in Montreal, we are now at 17% of the population having received a vaccine. There is more work to do, but we are delivering.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Other countries are opening up, Mr. Speaker, and Canada hasn't even hit 15 to 20%. That's a failure. This morning, Health Canada officials confirmed the 4-month delay in doses is an off-label use of a COVID-19 vaccine. Health Canada also confirmed this morning that there will likely be more changes to dosing directions. Canadians are left wondering, is there a plan? Why did the Prime Minister create a science problem because of his vaccine supply problem?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite is failing to recognize that as science has evolved and recommendations have changed, the government has changed recommendations associated with the evidence and experience and expertise of scientists, researchers, and public health experts. That's how, Mr. Speaker, this government believes it is the best way to respond to the pandemic, by using science, by understanding that as our knowledge and our understanding of the virus changes, so will our responses.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has failed to obtain a guarantee for the delivery of vaccines from Europe. There will be delays in the delivery of vaccines from India throughout April. Canada is already lagging behind the rest of our allies. How many other months of lockdowns will we have to have because of these delays? The Honourable Minister.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to clarify things. There isn't one of our vaccine deliveries from the EU that was blocked or delayed to date. Our deliveries of thousands of vaccines continue to arrive in Canada. And yesterday, the Prime Minister spoke to the President of the European Commission, who reassured us, saying that deliveries will continue to flow in. Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Auditor General report on pandemic preparedness found that it was the Liberal government that shuttered the global pandemic monitoring system that left Canada vulnerable. The audit also found that the Public Health Agency relied on a risk assessment tool that was not designed to consider pandemic risks. Why did this government shut down Canada's pandemic warning system in the lead up to the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, perhaps the member opposite would like to read the expert panel's interim report, where the expert panel indicated that indeed, although there were changes made to the Global Public Health Information Network, it did not delay the response by Canada. We have reviewed the Auditor General's report. We agree that this country, along with all countries, will need to review our response to the pandemic and make investments in public health, as we have been doing since the beginning of the pandemic.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, selon la...
Mr. Speaker, according to the AG's report on the pandemic preparation, it's the Liberal government that shut down the global warning system. And it also reveals that Public Health Agency relied on risk evaluations that were not calibrated to our pandemic. How come they eliminated the warning system before the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite knows, this government has used science and evidence at every step of the way to respond to COVID-19. And I will also say that since the beginning of the pandemic, we've expanded the Public Health Agency of Canada by more than 1,000 employees to date to bolster our capacity in a number of critical areas. I would urge the member opposite to stop stalling and pass C-14, which will further allot $690 million for Public Health Agency of Canada as dedicated in the fall 2020 economic statement.
The Honourable member for La Prairie. Thank you very much. Today, the Liberals are finally recognizing the need to increase health transfers to Quebec and the provinces. After years of efforts from the Bloc, Ottawa is finally recognizing that the federal government is underfunding health care. This is a first step, but the amounts announced in C-25 are not recurrent and are 7 times less than what Quebec and the other provinces are asking for. But there's an old Chinese proverb that says, even the longest journey begins with one step. Will the government commit to increasing health transfers on a recurring basis to cover 35% of costs? The Honourable Minister.
Step of the way. We've been there for provinces and territories to support them in their pandemic response, including $19 billion in direct transfers, including purchasing of PPE, of vaccines, of medical equipment. And Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has committed to continue to be there for provinces and territories to support them as the country recovers from COVID-19.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Unfortunately, that's just not enough. But it's not just the Bloc that's saying that, it's the premiers of Quebec and all the provinces. Short-term funding, while helpful, does not allow provinces and territories to address the long-term healthcare needs of Canadians. They need $28 billion to address federal underfunding, followed by annual increases of transfers. $4 billion is 7 times less, and it's not recurring. Is the government promising that this is the first step in a journey to 35% federal funding for health? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I have said repeatedly in this House and what the Prime Minister has committed to repeatedly in this House is to be there for Canadians, to be there for Quebecers, to be there for the province of Quebec throughout this pandemic and beyond. That is our commitment today to Canadians. We will do whatever it takes to get Canadians through this pandemic and back on the road to recovery.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 7 women were killed in 6 weeks in Quebec. We have to stop this femicide immediately. Violence against women is a pandemic within a pandemic. Women, organizations that support women need our support. What is the Prime Minister waiting for? What is his plan to end these senseless killings and to save lives? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, a life lost is one too many. We are mourning with you, and we will continue to support survivors.
Lives lost in 2020, 7 women lost in 7 weeks in Quebec. That is one too many. Our government will continue to work with frontline organizations who already over the past year have supported close to 1 million women and children and non-binary folks in their hour of need. We all must do more, and in their memory, we will.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
As a nation, we are dealing with the crisis of the pandemic. On top of that, the climate crisis continues to persist. We've got the Conservatives, a party that deny that there's even a problem, and the Liberals that continue to delay to take any real action to fight the climate crisis. More than just delay, we've got a Prime Minister who's all for show. He bought a pipeline. He continues to exempt the biggest polluters. And he continues to subsidize the fossil fuel sector. How can Canadians trust this Prime Minister to take on the climate crisis?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for the question. I appreciate the question on such an important day when the Supreme Court has upheld the constitutionality of Canada's approach to pricing carbon pollution, because carbon pollution should not be free anywhere in this country. Canada brought forward a strengthened climate plan in December. It is one of the most detailed and comprehensive climate plan that exists anywhere in this world. It provides a detailed path through which we will not only meet, but we will exceed our current Paris Agreement targets. And we have indicated that we will be bringing forth a new target that we will be announcing at the Earth Summit in April. This government takes climate change very seriously. It is an existential threat, but an enormous economic opportunity for this country.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in the scandal of the former Chief of Defence Staff suspected of inappropriate sexual conduct with a female member of the military, this is very troubling. We really have to get to the bottom of things. We need to know who in the government knew what and when. There is a key person in this situation who has not witnessed, yes, the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Defence. Does the Prime Minister want her to testify at the Defence Committee so that we can shed full light on this? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, my colleague knows full well who has the departmental responsibility, and the Minister will be there to answer questions at the House, at committees, and I find it very serious, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition tries to use their support to force people to witness they're trying to intimidate them at committee and treat them poorly. The minister will be there to answer questions, and that is their responsibility. Thank you. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Very serious? Intimidate them? Treat them poorly? Is the minister aware of what he just said? Doesn't make sense. Mr. Speaker, we really have to get to the bottom of things. These people, such as the former Chief of Staff to the Minister of Defence, this person has to say what she knows, and that is why we want her to be at committee. Will the government authorize that person to testify before the parliamentary committee so that full light can be shed on this? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I said that our parliamentary democracy means that our cabinet is responsible to the government, and we have to be responsible before the committees, not our employees. And that's something the Conservatives have always supported. I remember when Jay Hill also fought tooth and nail for ministerial responsibility at the time. And he was there today. He applauded our actions, and I'm very surprised today with what he said.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims his office had nothing to do with a $500 million grant to a group that had paid his family $500,000. But there's something about the timeline that doesn't add up. I have the contribution agreement that gave we the $500 million, and it was signed on June 23rd. However, the Kielburgers got authorization to start spending taxpayer reimbursable money on May 5th, 6 weeks earlier. Did the Kielburgers speak to anybody in the PMO on May 5th?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as committee members have requested, I have testified at committee and provided this information. As we have confirmed, the contribution agreement was negotiated between the professional, nonpartisan public service, and this information is all on the public record. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite seems to be very concerned about students and youth. It would be great if Conservative colleagues would stop holding back Bill C-14 so that we can help students with interest relief, so that we can help Canadians from coast to coast to coast, as we are still in the midst of the pandemic and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Carleton.
Well, the question was, if the Kielburgers spoke to anyone on May 5th, they had to have found out somehow that they were eligible to spend taxpayer funds on May 5th, and it certainly wasn't from the contract, which was signed by that minister on June 23rd, unless they have some telepathic abilities. It turns out they don't have telepathic abilities, but they do have a telephone. And they spoke to Rick Theiss, top advisor to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, on May 5th, the day they started spending money. Will they let Mr. Rick Theiss be nice and testify at committee to answer questions?
The Honourable Minister.
Come on, Mr. Speaker. Ministers are accountable to Parliament, not staffer. It's a long-standing tradition, something my colleagues supported at the time, and that's why our ministers are in question period, and they appear at committees to answer questions. Let me quote Jay Hill, Government House Leader under Stephen Harper. When ministers choose to appear before committees to account for their administration, they are the best source of accountability, and they must be heard. Public servants and ministerial staff support the responsibility of the ministers. They do not supplant it. They cannot supplant it. My colleague agreed with that at the time. Why did he change his mind?
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here we are in the middle of another series of Liberal cover-ups, all to protect the Prime Minister. It's in the middle of a pandemic when other countries are spending their time, their governments are making sure that they get their economies back on track, and these Liberals are looking to cover up corruptions. Canadians want a great Canadian comeback, and with these Liberals, they're focused on a great Canadian cover-up. So, will the Prime Minister allow for these staff to testify on what they knew about sexual misconduct in the military and on the $500 million WE scandal?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Conservatives are trying to cover up for the mistakes during their convention this weekend and the important decision by the Supreme Court today. So they want to switch channel, Mr. Speaker. They're going into petty politics. They know very well that there's a principle of ministerial responsibility. At the time when they were forming government, they fought very, very, very hard, Mr. Speaker, for this principle. I remember the MP from Carleton and other colleagues are sitting there in the House, how much they believed in this principle, how much they fought for this. And now what happened? They changed their mind all of a sudden?
Before we go to the next question, I just want to remind the honourable members who are joining us virtually to just adjust their microphone so that it's either slightly above, between their nose and their upper lip, or slightly below, between their chin and their lower lip, just so that we don't get that popping. Our interpreters do yeoman's work. We don't want to jeopardize their health. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, even adjusting the equipment, it wouldn't improve the quality of the answer from that minister, Mr. Speaker. It's the same old song and dance. They shut down Parliament, filibustered committees for the equivalent of 20 meetings alone at ethics, and they're talking about another party trying to change the channel. It's a cover-up of corruption of the highest magnitude. Members of this Prime Minister's family got $500,000, and then they gave that organization $500 million. The Chief of Defense Staff is alleged to have perpetrated sexual misconduct on the soldiers that he was entrusted to lead and protect, and this minister, this Prime Minister, knew about it. They gave him a raise, and they didn't protect the enlisted men and women who serve our country. These people need to come and testify. We expect the staff to testify. Will this Prime Minister let them?
Well said. Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the Conservatives that we're right in the middle of a pandemic, that Canadians are suffering, that Canadians are dying, that people are losing their jobs, and we should be debating that today. How can we help Canadians? How could we help our workers, our small businesses, our families, our seniors, Mr. Speaker? Instead of that, what do, they fall into petty politics, partisan politics, personal attacks like my colleague just did now. That's a shame, Mr. Speaker. That's a shame. And there's a principle. They know, they defend it. It's the ministerial responsibility. And now they changed their mind? Seriously?
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's still crazy. The Prime Minister refused to acknowledge that health transfers need to be increased. And then finally, they've told us that we could discuss it again after the pandemic. And now today we're told that the federal government will increase health transfers slightly during the pandemic. It's hard to understand them, but they may end up understanding the same thing. Will the Minister of Finance understand that we need to increase health transfers in a sustainable and substantial way now and include it in her next budget? The Honourable Minister. Usually the Bloc will wait for a yes, but we've already said yes, we are going to increase health transfers, but right now, we're on the pandemic, we're working really hard with all the provinces and the Quebec in particular. We're focusing on that. We're focusing on helping the provinces get through this in terms of supplies, equipment, vaccines. There's a whole package of measures we're putting into place, and we were there for the provinces, and we will continue to be so. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the federal government has left Quebec and the provinces to their own devices. At the beginning of the pandemic, for every $100 spent by the federal government, it invested 15 cents in health in the middle of a health crisis. With today's announcement, for every $100 spent, $1 will go to health in the middle of a health crisis. $1. That's better, but there's certainly nothing to cheer about. Even today, despite the announcement, Quebec and the provinces are asking for more. Will the government increase health transfers to 35% on a recurring basis? Recurring basis. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing to applaud because we don't applaud during a pandemic. We work. We roll our sleeves up to work. We work together with the provinces. But there's something we've done that the Bloc doesn't like, is that means we're working with Quebec. We've reached agreements for electricity, for internet services in the regions. We're working hand in hand with Quebec and for Quebecers, and they don't like that. The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Medical Association released a new study today showing that costs for seniors' care alone will rise by $490 billion over the next 10 years. $490 billion. What's Ottawa's answer? $4 billion in one payment. This study reminds us, as the Bloc has always said, that it is not national standards that seniors need, but a recurring increase in health funding. What is the government waiting for to substantially and recurrently increase health transfers without strings? The Honourable Minister.
I just want to remind the opposition of what we have been doing for seniors. For many months, we have been providing support for seniors through tax-free payments and enhanced community supports. While the government does remain committed to implementing policies that were reaffirmed in the throne speech, at this time, they know that we are focusing on managing the COVID-19 public health crisis, and we have given billions to provinces and territories to help with public health at this time of the crisis. Seniors can be assured that our government will be there to support them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Port of Montreal has been called the economic lifeblood of Quebec and Ontario. Approximately $100 billion in goods pass through that port every year, and it goes without saying that many Canadian businesses rely on the Port of Montreal to import and export goods. Unfortunately, it appears that the government's inability to facilitate a collective agreement with port workers will inevitably lead to a labour strike. Why hasn't the Liberal government done anything to ensure that both sides reach a mutually satisfactory agreement? The Honourable Minister.
Merci.
I'd like to thank my colleague for his question.
We understand that the parties have not yet reached an agreement, but the good news is that the parties are back at the table. We also recognize the central role of the port, and we are aware of the uncertainty of the current situation and the anxiety that it is creating in the supply chains. We have heard concerns from many stakeholders in recent weeks. We understand these concerns and take them very seriously. Right now, our focus is that the parties are at the table. We have supported that negotiation through providing mediation services, and we look forward to a resolution at the table. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, last year, a 19-year strike at the Port of Montreal resulted in $600 million in losses, which is unacceptable because these companies are affected. The Liberal government has dragged its feet on this issue long enough, and Canadians shouldn't have to suffer economic hardship because of their failures. Is the Liberal government still waiting for a crisis before taking action? With the pandemic, the Canadian economy cannot afford another strike. Why hasn't the government done more to ensure that the parties reach a satisfactory agreement for everyone? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question.
On this file from the very beginning, these parties have been negotiating for 2.5 years, and the Federal Mediation Service has been there at the table to support the parties. We realize the economic harm that this potentially can cause. Last month, I took the extra step of appointing 2 senior mediators from the Mediation Service. I want to assure the member that we are in close contact with the parties. We are monitoring the situation very closely. We are aware of the harm potentially that this could cause, and we are providing every support possible to have an agreement made at that table.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
And yet there is no resolution. On Sunday, Port of Montreal longshoremen completely rejected the collective agreement proposal, and a strike at one of our most vital ports is looming. Our rail lines are reducing service, ships are being rerouted, and we could see some major delays in receiving essential goods. Our reputation as a reliable trade partner is in serious jeopardy. Will the minister start taking Canada's supply chain seriously and ensure our port system remains open for business?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, repeat that we absolutely recognize the central role of the port, and we are aware of the uncertainty that the current situation is creating. A great deal of anxiety in supply chains across the various sectors, and that it has the potential to cause significant reputational damage and economic harm across Canada, particularly in Montreal and in Quebec and Ontario. We are absolutely fully on top of this situation. We are providing the supports. The mediators have been at that table for almost 2.5 years. We will continue to monitor this situation, and we strongly encourage the parties to come to an agreement at the table.
Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, today's Supreme Court ruling is good news. Canadians are concerned about the climate crisis, but they're also concerned about the Liberals' lack of action. Canada has missed every single climate target. The Liberals continue to hand out billions of dollars to big oil companies instead of putting that money into transit, energy-efficient homes, and clean energy, into good jobs for workers in the low-carbon economy. They failed to deliver on their promise of a Just Transition Act. When will the minister stop treating the carbon tax as a silver bullet, stop leaving workers behind, and stop subsidizing big polluters?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'm very pleased to be able to speak to the climate issue on a day when the Supreme Court reaffirmed Canada's, the federal government's ability to ensure that we are pricing pollution in every part of this country. It is an important component of a comprehensive climate plan that is focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building an economy that will drive prosperity in what will become an ever increasingly low carbon universe of the future. Certainly, Canada has a climate plan. It has perhaps one of the most detailed climate plans that exists anywhere in the world. We announced that in December. It demonstrates to Canadians very clearly how Canada will not just meet, but it will exceed the targets that it has established.
The honourable member for South Okanagan West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, the Globe and Mail reports that Canada's nuclear safety regulator gave a 10-year license extension to the Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, despite inspection data that government experts said appeared to defy the laws of physics. The concern is around the aging pressure tubes holding the nuclear fuel bundles. A tube failure could result in a $1 billion repair bill at best and a catastrophic Fukushima-like meltdown at worst. Why does the government take this hope for the best approach to nuclear safety?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Protecting the health and safety of Canadians and the environment are our top priorities when it comes to nuclear energy. Canada has a comprehensive and robust regulatory framework for nuclear safety, one of the best in the world. We are committed to continuous improvement. We are working closely with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and we welcome all their recommendations.
The honourable member for Bonavista, Burin Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, representation matters. All aspects of our society, our institutions, including the justice system, must reflect the diversity of Canada. By introducing critical reforms in 2016, our government has made the appointment process more open and transparent, leading to the appointment of more than 400 highly meritorious jurists. Can the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada update the House on ongoing efforts taken by our government to increase diversity on our bench?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from Bonavista, Burin Trinity for his advocacy. Yesterday, our government announced the historic appointment of the first Indigenous judge to the BC Court of Appeal, Justice Leonard Marchand, and also filled all vacancies on the Newfoundland and Labrador Supreme Court. This shows our commitment to diversity on the bench. More than half of all judges appointed by our government are women and also reflect increased representation of visible minorities, Indigenous peoples, LGBTQ2+ Canadians. Our courts must reflect the diversity that makes Canada great, Mr. Speaker, not only because it's right, but because it makes our justice system better.
The honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, all military members need to be able to report abuse of power and sexual misconduct, confident in the knowledge that they will not suffer further abuse or reprisal. The passing of Bill C-77 in 2019 ensured that the privacy and security of victims within the Canadian Armed Forces was protected in law. But this key legislation has not been implemented or enforced. Those who come forward still suffer. Why has the Defence Minister failed to implement the Charter of Victims in the Armed Forces?
Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we as a government are working to provide support for victims with the Ombudsman for victims in our country. We have funded a number of different programs across this country, Mr. Speaker, specifically targeted at victims. I can cite, for example, the family liaison units that came about as a result of MMIWG. Mr. Speaker, we look at all aspects of Canadian society in order to ensure that victims are accompanied in their dealings with the criminal justice system, and we do our best to treat them and support them with the respect and dignity that they deserve.
The honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Well, Canadians continue to learn that far too many military members who have experienced sexual assault and misconduct remain trapped in a culture where their voices go unheard. Bill C-77 protects in law the anonymity and security of victims and witnesses in these cases. But failure to implement this critical charter has allowed serious allegations to be ignored, investigations to be shut down, and charges to be dropped. Why has the Defence Minister for 2 years failed to ensure that the Charter of Victims in the Armed Forces is in force.
Honourable Minister. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I had stated in my previous answer, we take victims' rights seriously across all aspects of Canadian society. That includes the military, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker. I will come back to the member with a specific answer to her question that focuses on the military.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, we recently learned from a senior government official that the Liberals were not pursuing a complete exemption from President Biden's Buy American policies, only looking at sector-specific exemptions. The Conservatives negotiated a full exemption back in 2009. Did the Minister of International Trade push for a complete exemption for Canada from Buy American during her call with the U.S. Trade Representative on March 22nd, or is the government's position now just settling for second best?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the member opposite knows, Buy America was raised directly during the bilateral meeting with President Biden. And as Ambassador Hillman confirmed at her testimony before our committee, the issue of Buy America is consistently raised in almost every meeting between almost every minister and their U.S. counterparts. We will continue to engage actively with our business community here in Canada, the business community in the United States, and all levels of government in order to get a successful outcome to this issue, just as we did in our concerted effort to successfully conclude the new NAFTA.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, strict Buy American policies would be devastating to the Canadian economy and impact our integrated supply chains if the Liberals fail to get a full exemption. The government would be hand-picking which sectors and perhaps which businesses succeed or fail if only seeking a partial exemption. If a full Buy American exemption is not granted to Canada, what is the Liberals' plan to stop the exodus of good-paying, middle-class Canadian manufacturing jobs from packing up and moving south of the border?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the member opposite should know, Canada already benefits from a complete exemption from the Buy American provisions that the United States put in place. And as I mentioned earlier, we continue to work at all levels in order to gain an exemption to Buy America. This is just as much in the interest of the United States as it is in Canada. We are all looking for a strong economic recovery in North America, and we will work with the Biden administration to get there.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-Lévesque. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General today confirmed that border management during the pandemic was a failure on all counts. Imagine, the federal government was unable to know whether 66% of travelers entering Canada actually quarantined. That means that 2 out of 3 travelers who returned to Canada during the pandemic fell through the cracks. How is it possible to lose track of 2/3 of people when people's health and seniors' lives are at stake? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as of March 8th, 2 million verification calls and over 70,000 in-person visits have been made to verify traveler compliance. 1.2 million referrals to law enforcement since April 1st, 2020, 96% quarantine compliance rate since April 1st, 2020, 98% quarantine compliance rate based on law enforcement activities. We've worked with partners across the country, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that people quarantine when they are required to do so by law.
Point of, Mr. President. Point of order, Mr. Speaker? Yes? The Honourable Member has a point of order? Yes. Throughout the question, we didn't hear the member asking the question. We only had a visual. I'm wondering if they could start over. Okay.
Peut-être si.
No. Did anyone else on Zoom have the same problem? I just want to confirm that the problem was with the software and not with that particular member's camera. Did anyone else also miss the question? Okay. Sorry? All right. We'll allow the honourable member to repeat his question. The honourable member, please go ahead. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General today confirmed that border management during the pandemic was a failure on all counts. Imagine, the federal government was unable to know whether 66% of travelers entering Canada actually did their quarantine. That means that 2 out of 3 travelers who returned to Canada during this pandemic fell through the cracks. How is it possible to lose track of 2/3 of people when people's health and seniors' lives are at stake? The Honourable Minister.
Là, Monsieur le Président, va falloir que...
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe the Bloc will have to choose a side here. You know, there are millions of Quebecers who are in the red zone who aren't able to see their parents and grandparents. In Quebec, people are worried about a 3rd wave based on variants. And now they're talking about lifting quarantines for snowbirds coming back into the country. So what do they want? Do they want more or less restrictions? We have one of the strongest systems in the world, and we're going to continue to uphold it. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-Basque. Mr. Speaker, well, the government is clearly confused. We asked the same question twice and got 2 different answers. Not only was the federal government not able to ensure that 2 out of 3 travelers quarantined as required, they weren't even able to get the appropriate authorities involved to help. The federal government only provided law enforcement with 40% of the names of people who were at risk of violating their quarantine. Ottawa let the majority of people who crossed the border go unmonitored without even notifying the province of Quebec. Well, no wonder variants are running rampant. Does the government realize that it is responsible for gross negligence? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement...
Mr. Speaker, the government has one of the most stringent border control systems in the world, with tests at departure, at arrival, with hotel quarantines. And during this time, the Bloc wants to lift hotel quarantines for people coming back to Canada. The Bloc Québécois, says, oh, we know that Quebecers can't go outside. We know that they're sacrificing things. We know that we're asking for a lot of things. But you know what? We're actually going to lift the criteria for some people coming back into Canada. We're going to lower the expectations despite everything that's going on. And that's irresponsible.
Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. Oui.
Point of order? Yes, during the question. Again, someone turned on their microphone, and so we lost some of the question, I believe. Mr. Speaker, on the same point of order, I mean, I appreciate my colleague, but, I think there was a very clear question asked. I don't think there was any interruption. Perhaps there was a small delay. Would the Honourable Minister like to repeat his answer? I believe there may have been a small problem. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I'm quite aware that this is a new situation and that there are technological issues and so on, but, I could very clearly see the minister responding. I mean, yes, there might have been a 3/4 of a second of a delay, but I think everyone understood what he was saying. Now, whether we agree with the substance of what he said, that's another issue, but we heard him clearly. So if everyone agrees, we will continue with the next question. The Honourable Member for...
Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, For a year now, we've been asking this Liberal government for their plan to bring international farm workers to help Canadian fruit and vegetable growers with their crops. These workers are vital to giving Canadians a secure and reliable supply of produce. But growers are still uncertain they will have their workers in time to harvest the early crops and get the next crops planted because of the new convoluted quarantine and testing requirements. So, Speaker, why does the Minister of Agriculture and her Liberal friends care so little about Canadian agriculture and Canadian food sovereignty? Where is the plan?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. Our government recognizes the importance of temporary foreign workers for our producers and our food processors. We're working tirelessly to ensure that temporary foreign workers can arrive safely in Canada by supporting employers with additional costs incurred to accommodate the isolation period. All the federal departments involved in the temporary foreign worker program have worked together to simplify processes and facilitate as much as possible the safe entry of these workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Haldimand, Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they need to do better because a farmer here in Haldimand, Norfolk, is concerned about one of his international workers who's been alone in quarantine for over 25 days. Why? Because he's still waiting for a test kit from Switch Health. Now, this wait is unacceptable and inhumane, and sadly, it's not an isolated case. We had real problems getting international farm workers here last year, and now this bumbling Liberal government just keeps creating new difficulties for farmers. Why won't they help our farmers feed Canadians?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. As I said before, our government recognizes the importance of temporary foreign workers. All federal departments involved in temporary foreign worker program has worked together to simplify processes and facilitate as much as possible the safe entry of workers. We recognize the integral role our farmers and food processing employers play in ensuring Canadians have access to food, and we are here to support them. The fall economic statement committed an additional $34.4 million to continue the mandatory isolation support for temporary foreign workers. Between September and December 2020, around 2,053 temporary foreign workers have arrived in Canada to support the 2021 season. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, all three opposition parties, including the Conservatives, have agreed on the need to extend EI benefits from 15 to 50 weeks in cases of serious illness. This is an issue where we wouldn't accuse the government of overspending because we realize that it's an essential safety issue for people who are fighting for their lives. Will the Prime Minister commit to passing this EI change before the next election is called? The Honourable Minister.
Mr.
Speaker, Canadians want a strong, flexible, adaptable EI system, and they deserve one. That's why we've spent the last 5 years modernizing the system and improving it for the well-being of Canadians. EI sickness benefits are a significant support measure for Canadians who need to temporarily leave work. Currently, we are committed to extending it up to 26 weeks. Thank you.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, this past year has not been easy. In my community, I've listened to my constituents describe time and time again their frustration with the lack of a reliable internet connection. Many of us have had to work from home or take online courses. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need for this essential service. Can the Minister of Rural and Economic Development share with this House the steps that our government is taking to ensure that Quebecers have reliable, high-speed internet access? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are delivering for Quebecers. This week, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry announced an investment of $420 million to bring high-speed internet access to Quebec. And will do so over the next 2 years. It's clear that our government is ready to collaborate with all of its partners in order to defend the interests of all Canadians in rural and remote areas. I want to thank members for their hard work on this project.
Honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Paul-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, on February 16th, I asked a question to the Minister of Finance. I have a company in my riding that was excluded from the emergency rent relief program because of an arm's length relationship. At the time, the minister told me, Mr. Speaker, that she's trying to help all businesses that are eligible for this program and this support. Many companies need this support to avoid bankruptcy, but a month later, this company has still received nothing. So can the minister tell us when she plans to change the program and help these struggling companies? The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I'd thank the honourable member for the question and for his advocacy on this important issue. As a result of our program rollout, we've learned that we need to make certain adjustments as we go, including what was originally the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, which was converted to the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy Program. We made certain changes and now have seen nearly 100,000 businesses receive a direct forgivable or direct subsidy rather to contribute to the fixed cost of keeping the doors open. We'll continue to monitor these programs to adjust as necessary to ensure that businesses are supported so that they're still here on the back end of this pandemic to contribute to the recovery. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mission Matsky Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, home prices are skyrocketing. CMHC and the banks confirm what we already know. The market is overheating. But the Liberals' plan for first-time home buyers continues to miss the mark completely. We're over halfway through their program that was to help 100,000 Canadians, but it's reached just a tenth of that, despite the hot real estate market. When will this government implement housing policies that make sense and secure the future for young Canadians priced out of the market?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government introduced Canada's first ever national housing strategy because we want every Canadian to find a safe and affordable place to call home. As part of the national housing strategy, we introduced the first-time home buyer incentive, which will help middle-class Canadians achieve their dream of home by lowering their monthly mortgage payments without increasing down payments. And in the fall economic statement, we committed to expand the program to be more reflective of the financial realities of first-time home buyers in Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Lanley City.
Mr. Speaker, in the Vancouver area, the cost of an average home is already inflated by $644,000 because of red tape from all levels of government. COVID is not the time for extra costs for homeowners. At the Finance Committee, I asked the Assistant Deputy Minister in charge of tax policy if there were plans for a new home equity tax. He told me he wouldn't comment on new taxes and that I should ask the Finance Minister. So, will the minister introduce a new home equity tax, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government is not thinking or considering or bringing any home equity tax. Any suggestion is false, and we have clarified that a number of times, and I will keep saying that over and over again. We are not considering that, and we are not implementing that.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, today's landmark decision is an important one in the fight against climate change and the most efficient tool in this effort. The Supreme Court affirmed what the Conservative Leaders Party rejected just this past weekend. Climate change is real, and we have to act. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Environment and Climate Change please update this House on today's decision and our plan to fight climate change?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the member of West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country for his important question. Today, the Supreme Court reaffirmed what Canadians have known all along. Climate change is real, and putting a price on pollution is of concern to Canada as a whole. Mr. Speaker, only Conservative politicians are disputing the reality and the urgency of climate change. Today's historic decision is a win for the millions of Canadians who believe we must build a prosperous economy that fights climate change, many of whom participated in the court's hearings, such as doctors, economists, cities, labor, Indigenous groups, and young people. And it is a win for the hardworking families who will continue to receive more money in their pockets through the Climate Action Incentive. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, coastal British Columbians have been appealing to this government for months to declare a wild salmon emergency and to save Pacific wild salmon. But after 2 years of not having a federal budget, people are rightly concerned that the Liberals aren't taking this seriously. Coastal First Nations and British Columbians need a government that will make historic investments in the conservation, protection, and restoration of wild salmon habitats. Will the minister declare a wild salmon emergency today and make the necessary investments in their budget to protect Pacific wild salmon?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my honourable colleague for the question and also for his hard work and advocacy on the Fisheries Committee when they're doing their study now on wild Pacific salmon. Mr. Speaker, this is a species that's in critical shape. We know that there are a lot of factors that are impacting our wild Pacific salmon, including climate change, as well as the human impacts from contaminants and the changes in land and water use. That is why our government has invested $145 million in habitat restoration. We're going to continue to work with First Nations communities, provinces, and territories to find the best solutions possible because we know how iconic this species is to British Columbia. Mr. Speaker, there is more that needs to be done, and I look forward to working with the member opposite.
The Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister admitted that there is systemic racism in all systems that govern this country. He recognized that systemic anti-Black racism exists in Canada, causes deep pain, and has undermined the livelihoods of Black Canadians. And Canada's own public service is complicit. As a result of systemic racism and discrimination, the government has failed to achieve equality and correct the conditions which disadvantage Black civil servants. Mr. Speaker, reparation is the act of making up for wrongdoing. Will this fight in court the Black civil servants who courageously came forward to expose the wrongdoing they faced during their career, or will they work towards reparation? Will the government commit today to review the Employment Equity Act and ensure it brings down the category of visible minorities, acknowledging the unique and systemic racism faced by Black employees?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the question. I want to thank the honourable member for raising these important issues. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to building back even better and consciously more inclusive. This is work that we started when we took office in October 2015. We brought back an anti-racism strategy that was created by Canadians for Canadians, informed by Indigenous people, Black Canadians, racialized Canadians, religious minorities, and so forth. We have an anti-racism secretariat. Yes, we are committed to reviewing the Employment Equity Act. Yes, we are committed to working with all partners who want to ensure that Canadians are not left on the sidelines. We recognize that COVID-19 has impacted the entire world, all Canadians, disproportionately certain segments. We are committed to ensuring that those segments are no longer left behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. C'est tout le temps que nous avons.